Kyung-Soo Park stared at the wall of his small laboratory and saw something that no one else could see. The room was cold and dark, with only a few lights turned on. Papers covered every surface. Equations filled every corner of the white walls, written in black marker and colored pen. Some equations were crossed out. Others had been rewritten many times. The air smelled like coffee that had been left sitting for too long and dust from old machines. He was a human engineer, and humans were not supposed to be in places like this. Humans were not supposed to question the Galactic Coalition's biggest scientists. Humans were the newcomers to space, the young species that still made mistakes and took unnecessary risks. They were the ones who smiled too much and believed in too many impossible things. But Kyung-Soo had always been different. The Galactic Coalition was the most powerful organization in all of known space. It had been created 3,000 years ago, long before humans ever left their home planet. The Aurelians had created much of the Coalition's science. They were perfect at mathematics and physics. They never made mistakes. The Vexithari had added their own brilliant engineering knowledge. They built things that lasted for thousands of years. The Coalition also included the Kalori, the merchants of time and space, and many other advanced species. Together, they had created laws of physics that they believed were absolute and unchangeable. One of these laws was this: faster-than-light travel without using wormholes required infinite energy. It was impossible. Every scientist in the Coalition agreed on this. Every computer had tested this theory millions of times. Every university and every star system taught this law as simple truth. It was as unchangeable as the sunrise. But Kyung-Soo did not believe it. He had been working in the Coalition's research station for 5 years now. The station was built on Kepler 442b, a planet that circled a red star. The planet had 3 moons and very little life. The research station was the only real building for thousands of kilometers. When Kyung-Soo first arrived, he thought it was the most important place in the universe. Now he felt like he was invisible. The Coalition's leaders had given him a job and a laboratory. They had given him basic equipment and access to their databases. But they did not give him respect. They did not listen to his ideas. When he tried to speak at meetings, the Aurelian scientists would smile politely and then ignore what he said. They were never rude. They were simply certain that he was wrong before he even opened his mouth. Kyung-Soo had started to think differently about the problem 6 months ago. He was reading old equations that Aurelian scientists had written hundreds of years before. They were trying to prove that faster-than-light travel was impossible. Their mathematics was beautiful and perfect. It showed that you would need infinite energy to push something faster than light. But then Kyung-Soo asked a different question. Everyone had been asking, how do we move an object faster than light? Kyung-Soo asked instead, what if we do not move the object at all? What if we move the space around the object instead? It was a wild idea. It was a strange idea. It was the kind of idea that humans had. Humans did not always think in straight lines. Humans took big jumps in their thinking. Sometimes these jumps led nowhere. Sometimes they led somewhere amazing. Kyung-Soo began to work in secret. He did not want to present another incomplete idea to scientists who had already decided he was not worth their time. He filled his walls with new equations. He borrowed access to the Coalition's computers when no one was watching. He read papers from every species. He talked to Mi-jin, his only real friend at the station. Mi-jin was a human physicist. She was smart and careful and kind. She worked in a different part of the research station in the normal physics department. But she often came to Kyung-Soo's laboratory late at night. She would study his equations, and she would ask good questions. She did not tell him his ideas were impossible. She asked him to make them better. One night, Mi-jin came to the laboratory and found Kyung-Soo asleep in his chair. Papers had fallen all around him. His coffee cup sat empty on the floor. She looked at his newest equations and gasped. He had done it. He had found something. When Kyung-soo woke up, Mi-jin was staring at the wall. Her eyes were wide. "This is real," she said quietly. "Kyung-soo, this actually works." Kyung-soo sat up slowly. His back hurt and his head felt foggy. "You think so?" "I do not think so," Mi-jin said. "I know so. The mathematics is perfect. You have found a way to bend the space around an object without moving the object itself. The energy requirements are not infinite. They are possible. We could actually build this." For the first time in many months, Kyung-soo smiled a real smile. But he knew what would happen if he presented this to the Coalition's council. They would listen politely. They would ask a few questions. They would say the idea had problems and needed more work. Then they would move on to other projects that Aurelian scientists thought were more important. His dream would die in a polite meeting room. So Kyung-soo made a choice that night. He decided not to ask permission anymore. He decided to build his impossible machine anyway. Mi-jin asked what he needed. Kyung-soo made a list. They needed better equipment. They needed materials that were hard to find. They needed a private place to work where no one would ask questions. They needed time and money and a lot of hope. For the first time since arriving at the Coalition's station, Kyung-soo felt alive. He was not the invisible human engineer anymore. He was a person with a real dream. He was going to do something that 3,000 years of the galaxy's greatest minds had said was impossible, and no one could stop him. The next morning, Kyung-soo deleted all his secret files from the Coalition's computers. He made backups on a small device that he kept hidden. He cleaned his walls and removed all his equations. To anyone who looked, the laboratory would appear empty. He was ready to begin his real work. In the hallway outside, the Aurelian scientists walked past without noticing him. The Vexithari engineers discussed their own projects and did not stop to say hello. The universe was very large and humans were very small, but Kyung-soo Park was about to change that. The moon called Prometheus orbited Kepler 442b and had been forgotten by the Galactic Coalition long ago. It was a cold, gray place with deep caves beneath its surface. No one lived there anymore. No one wanted to. The mining operations had stopped 50 years before, and the equipment had been left to rust and decay in the darkness. This was exactly what Kyung-soo and Mi-jin needed. It took 3 weeks to find the place. They explored the caves at night when no one from the research station would see them. The caves were large and empty and perfect. There were old machines that could be fixed. There was water frozen beneath the surface. There was protection from the radiation that covered the moon. And most importantly, there was complete privacy. Kyung-soo told the Coalition that he was taking a break from research. He said he needed time to think about his future. They did not care. A human taking time off was not important news. Mi-jin said she was going to visit her family on the human space station for a month. No one questioned her story. They began to gather equipment. Some they bought quietly from traders who came to the station. Some they stole very carefully, taking only old things that no one was using anymore. Some they built from scratch using basic materials. It was slow work. It was difficult. It was thrilling. Then they needed more people. Haiwan was a materials scientist from Korea, the region on Earth where Kyung-soo and Mi-jin both came from. She worked in the Coalition's materials laboratory, testing how different substances would behave in space. She was brilliant and careful and had already broken 3 safety rules by the time Kyung-soo asked her to join them. When Kyung-soo explained his idea, Haiwan was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This will never work." Kyung-soo's heart fell. "But I want to try anyway," Haiwan continued. "I want to be part of something that matters. I want to work on something that no one says is possible." The second person they brought into their group was Tai-sung. He was a pilot, trained by the Coalition to fly shuttles and transport ships. He was young, only 25 years old, and he had always wondered what it felt like to do something truly dangerous. He had heard about Kyung-soo's project through other humans who worked at the station. He came to find them in the caves and said one sentence, "I want to fly it first." Kyung-soo had not even asked if they needed a pilot yet, but he knew that Tae-sung was right. When the machine was ready, someone would have to test it. Someone would have to sit inside and risk everything. With their small team gathered, they began to build. The caves became their workshop. The old mining machines became tools. The broken equipment from the station became their materials. Every night, one or more of them would slip away from their duties and go to Prometheus. Every morning they would return, tired but excited. The heart of the project was something no one had ever tried to create before. Kyung-soo called it an exotic matter engine. It needed to create a bubble of changed space around a shuttle. Inside this bubble, the normal rules of physics would bend. The object could move faster than light without needing infinite energy. But creating this bubble required materials that did not normally exist in nature. Hae-won spent weeks researching. She looked at old coalition experiments. She read papers from scientists who had failed. She studied the quantum physics that described how atoms worked. Then she began to build her own materials, combining elements in ways that violated every safety protocol the coalition had ever created. She created matter that should not exist. The atoms inside it bent space around themselves. When Hae-won first showed Kyung-soo a small sample, it was floating in the air without any support. It had its own gravity field, but the field was wrong. It pointed in all directions at once. "This is impossible," Mi-jin whispered. "Good," Hae-won said, smiling. "Everything we are doing is impossible. We might as well be thorough." Building the actual engine took 2 months. It was smaller than Kyung-soo had imagined. The exotic matter core was only about the size of a human fist, but it had to be placed inside a magnetic field that was strong enough to hold it stable. This required coils of superconducting material wound in a very specific pattern. The pattern was so complex that it took Mi-jin 3 weeks to design it correctly. They built the coils from materials they stole from the coalition's laboratories. They used equipment from the old mining station to wind the wire into the correct shape. Tae-sung spent hours testing different configurations, checking the magnetic fields with instruments they had salvaged. Around them, in the darkness of the caves, the impossible machine began to take shape. There were nights when they wondered if they were crazy. There were moments when the equipment would break, and they would have to spend days fixing it with limited resources. There were times when Hae-won thought her exotic matter would explode, and they all held their breath while she tested it. There were mornings when Kyung-soo wanted to give up and go back to his normal life, but they did not stop. By the end of 2 months, they had built the core of the engine. It sat in a shuttle that they had brought to the caves piece by piece. The shuttle was old and small, designed to carry only 1 or 2 people. It was perfect for their first test. The 5 safety protocols that existed in coalition law stated that any new propulsion system must be tested extensively in a laboratory before any living being would enter it. Kyung-soo and his team had none of these safety tests. They had no backup systems. They had no way to get help if something went wrong. The Aurelian scientists would have called it madness, but humans had always been willing to break rules and risk everything for something they believed in. On the night before the test, Kyung-soo stood in the cave and looked at the machine they had built. It was small and imperfect, and probably would not work. But it represented everything that humans were supposed to be. It represented creativity and courage, and the refusal to accept what others said was impossible. Tae-sung was sleeping in the corner of the cave. Mi-jin and Hae-won were checking the final connections one more time. Tomorrow, the young pilot would climb into that shuttle. Tomorrow, they would find out if all their work meant anything. Kyung-soo whispered a word in Korean that meant both impossible and beautiful, and he waited for the morning to come. The morning was gray and cold. like all mornings on Prometheus. The sun rose over the horizon as a small red dot. Tae-sung stood next to the shuttle and pulled his flight suit on with slow, careful movements. His hands were shaking, though he would not admit it to the others. He had been a pilot for 3 years. He had flown 100 times through space. He had never been afraid before. But this was different. This was not a machine that had been tested and proved safe. This was an experiment. This was a suicide mission, dressed up as a test flight. Kyung-soo watched from across the cave. He held a small beer bottle in his hand. It was a drink from Earth, something humans made from grain and water and time. Kyung-soo had brought it with him from Earth 5 years ago and saved it for a special moment. He pressed the bottle against Tae-sung's flight suit. "Hold this," Kyung-soo said. "And remember that humans have always done the impossible. We crossed oceans in wooden boats. We walked on the moon with machines made of aluminum and hope. We created cities and music and art from nothing. You are not the first human to be afraid, but you will be the first to do this." Tae-sung took the bottle and looked at it. The label was faded and written in Korean, a language he did not read, but he understood the meaning. "What does it say?" he asked. "It says, 'Hold my beer,'" Mi-jin said, smiling from where she stood near the control equipment. "In Earth culture it means, 'Watch this,' or 'I am about to do something crazy.' Kyung-soo has been waiting for the right moment to use it." Tae-sung nodded. He placed the bottle carefully into a special slot they had built into the shuttle's wall. It was not safe to have objects floating around in a space vehicle. But then, nothing about this project was safe. He climbed into the pilot's seat. It was a tight fit, the shuttle was small, and the exotic matter engine took up a lot of space. But there was room for Tae-sung and a single control panel. The controls were simple because they had designed them to be simple. Kyung-soo had said that complex systems had more ways to break. Mi-jin's voice came through the communication system. "Can you hear me, Tae-sung?" "I hear you," Tae-sung said. His voice was steady even though his heart was beating very fast. "Check the engine temperature," Mi-jin said. Tae-sung looked at the display. It showed 105 degrees Celsius. That was normal. He reported the number. "Check the magnetic field stability," Mi-jin said. Tae-sung looked at another display. The numbers were green. All systems were ready. He told them so. In the control area of the cave, Kyung-soo and Hai-won sat at a table covered with instruments and computer screens. The screens showed every number that mattered. The engine temperature, the magnetic field strength, the power levels, the exotic matter core status. Everything looked good. Everything looked impossible. "We are ready to begin the sequence," Kyung-soo said. His voice was very quiet. "Tae-sung, are you ready?" Mi-jin asked. Inside the shuttle, Tae-sung put his hand on a red button. This button would start the engine. Once he pressed it, there would be no turning back. The process could not be stopped. The shuttle would either work or it would not. Either way, in the next few minutes, everything would be different. "I am ready," Tae-sung said, and he pressed the button. The shuttle began to vibrate. At first, it was a small vibration, like the rumble of a normal engine starting up. But then it grew stronger. The whole shuttle shook. Tae-sung gripped the sides of his seat to keep steady. The screens in front of him began to flash with numbers. The engine temperature climbed. 110 degrees, 120, 130. The magnetic field was holding, but it was taking more and more power. The exotic matter core was beginning to spin, slower and slower, building up to something. In the control area, Kyung-soo watched the numbers climb. This was the moment where the machines in the coalition simulators had always failed. The temperature would rise beyond what the materials could handle. The magnetic field would collapse. The whole system would explode. But their machine kept going. 140 degrees. The magnetic field was at maximum strength. The exotic matter core was spinning very fast now. The vibration in the shuttle had become so strong that Tae-sung could barely see the instruments in front of him. Mi-jin was watching her own displays. She whispered, "Come on, come on, come on." Hae-won held her breath. She had created the exotic matter. She knew better than anyone how unstable it was. It should have shattered. It should have released all its energy at once. Instead, it kept spinning. The vibration reached its peak and then suddenly stopped. For one moment, everything was quiet. Then the shuttle simply vanished. 1 second it was there, sitting on the floor of the cave, shaking and vibrating and real. The next second, there was empty space where the shuttle had been. It was gone as if it had never existed at all. In the control area, every alarm in the system began to sound at once. Kyung-soo and Hae-won jumped to their feet. Mi-jin was already working at the communication system, trying to reach Tae-sung. "Tae-sung? Tae-sung, do you read me?" she said into the microphone. "Tae-sung." "What happened?" There was nothing but silence. The communication system showed no signal. The shuttle had disappeared, and they could not reach it. Kyung-soo felt the world spin. Had they killed their friend? Had the machine destroyed him? Had 3,000 years of Galactic Coalition scientists been right about the laws of physics all along? Then a sound crackled through the speakers. It was very far away and very quiet, but it was there. A voice. Tae-sung's voice. He was laughing. "I am here," the voice said. It was filled with wonder and joy and disbelief. "Mi-jin, I am here. I am 3 light years away. I can see the space station far below me. I can see Kepler 442b from here. I can see the star itself. The whole planet is so small from here. Kyung-soo, Hae-won, Mi-jin." It worked. It actually worked. For several seconds, no one in the cave said anything. Then Mi-jin began to cry. Hae-won sat down very suddenly in her chair. Kyung-soo held on to the table to keep his legs from giving out beneath him. They had done it. The impossible had been accomplished. The beer bottle that Kyung-soo had brought from Earth was still sitting on the table beside him, empty now, the label faded and worn. But the message was clear. A human had said, "Hold my beer to all the laws of physics." A human had done the impossible, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Galactic Coalition could not ignore what had happened. By the next morning, every monitoring station in the system was reporting the same impossible news. A shuttle had disappeared from Prometheus and then sent signals from 3 light years away. The laws of physics that had stood unchanged for 3,000 years had been broken. The Coalition's council met in emergency session. The Aurelian scientists were confused and angry. The Vexithari engineers demanded to know how this could happen. The Kalori merchants were already planning how to profit from this technology. Everyone had questions, and no one had answers. When Kyung-soo and his team brought the shuttle back to the main research station, they became the most famous humans in the galaxy. News stations across 1,000 worlds were reporting the story. Species that had never heard of humans before suddenly wanted to know everything about them. But success brought problems that they had not expected. The Coalition's leadership demanded access to every detail of the project. They wanted the complete designs. They wanted to understand every equation. They wanted to take the technology and study it in their own laboratories. Some members of the council said that Kyung-soo and his team had been reckless and dangerous. They said the technology should never have been created without proper approval. An old Aurelian scientist named Dr. Vell came to Kyung-soo's laboratory. He was one of the most respected physicists in the Coalition, and Kyung-soo had debated with him many times before being dismissed. Velle looked tired, and his blue skin seemed to glow less brightly than it usually did. "I owe you an apology," Velle said. Kyung-soo was surprised. He had expected the older scientist to be angry. You do not owe me anything, Kyung-soo said politely. No, I do, Vel said, sitting down heavily in a chair. I have studied your equations. I have verified every calculation. The mathematics is correct. More than that, the mathematics is beautiful. You did not break the laws of physics. You found something that we all missed. You found a way to bend space-time at the subatomic level in a way that no one had thought to try. Why did no one think of it before? Kyung-soo asked. Because we did not need to, Vel said. We had accepted that faster-than-light travel was impossible. We had built our entire civilization around that acceptance. We created wormholes instead. We learned to use the space between spaces to travel. It worked, and it was safe, and it was proven. Why would we question something that worked? Because humans do not know any better, Kyung-soo said quietly. Vela smiled very slightly. Exactly. You did not have 3,000 years of history telling you it could not be done. You did not have 1,000 textbooks teaching you that this was impossible. You thought like an engineer with a problem, not like a scientist with certainty. That is your gift. But not everyone in the coalition was as accepting as Vel. The Vex-Thari Council of Engineers released a statement saying that the project violated every safety protocol ever created. They demanded that Kyung-soo be arrested and the technology destroyed. They said that taking risks like this would destroy the very foundation of galactic stability. The Aurelian government issued a different kind of statement. They said that since Aurelian scientists had laid the groundwork for all physics, the technology should belong to Aurelians. They filed a legal claim saying that Kyung-soo's work was based on their knowledge and therefore their property. Within days, military ships from 5 different species began to arrive at the research station. Some came to protect the technology, some came to steal it, some came to ensure it was destroyed. The peaceful scientific station became a place of tension and fear. Kyung-soo could not leave the station without being stopped and questioned. Mi-jin was told she could not work in any coalition laboratory without special permission. Haewon's research credentials were temporarily suspended. Tae-sung was debriefed by military officials for hours and hours. Humans across the galaxy were watching what was happening. For the first time, they saw themselves as a unified species facing discrimination from more powerful civilizations. Human communities on 100 different worlds held protests. They demanded that the coalition respect Kyung-soo's achievement. They said that humans had earned their place among the stars. Some humans wanted to use the technology for weapons. Military advisors began to appear at the station, asking if the shuttle could be adapted to carry weapons. What if you could travel faster than light and drop a bomb at the same time? What if you could attack from anywhere in the galaxy without warning? Kyung-soo refused every request. We built this to travel, he said, not to harm. But the political situation was growing worse. The coalition was splitting. Some species wanted to embrace the new technology. Others wanted to suppress it. Still others wanted to control it for themselves. Then one night, Dr. Vel came to Kyung-soo's laboratory again. This time he was not alone. He had brought 5 other scientists with him. 3 were Aurelian. 2 were from smaller species that had been part of the coalition for hundreds of years. We want to help you, Vel said. Not to steal your work, but to help you develop it properly. With our support, the coalition will have to accept your technology. They cannot reject something that the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy are defending. Why would you do this? Kyung-soo asked. Because the age of one species being dominant is ending, Vela said. Because humans have shown us that there is always another way to think about a problem. Because the future belongs to anyone brave enough to try something impossible. And because I am old, and I have spent my life inside the boundaries of what I thought was possible. I do not want to die knowing that I prevented someone else from breaking those boundaries. With Vela and his team supporting them, the situation changed. The coalition could not arrest Kyung-soo or confiscate his work without facing rebellion from some of their greatest scientists. The Vex-Thari threats became less serious. The Aurelian claims to ownership were dismissed by the coalition's legal system. Slowly, the military ships began to leave. The tension at the station decreased. Kyung-soo was allowed to continue his work. Mi-jin was given a new laboratory of her own. Haewon's credentials were restored with an apology. But everyone knew that this was only the beginning. The technology existed now. It could not be put back in a box. The galaxy would never be the same. And a new age was beginning. An age when humans would take their place not as students of the older civilizations, but as partners in creating the future. Within 1 year, the drive that Kyung-soo had built became the foundation of a new age. The technology spread across the galaxy faster than light travel itself could move. Every species that wanted to remain important in the Galactic Coalition began to build their own version of the engine. Universities started to teach the principles behind it. Engineers and scientists from 1,000 worlds came to study with Kyung-soo's team. The human space stations, which had been small and poor and forgotten, suddenly became centers of learning. Young Aurelians came to study how to think differently. Young Vex-Thari came to learn how to take risks. Young members of every species that existed wanted to learn the human way of breaking impossible problems. The news network started calling it the Kyung-soo Drive, or sometimes the Human Engine. Kyung-soo hated both names. He said that the technology was not his alone. It belonged to Mi-jin and Haewon and Tai-sung and to all the humans who had supported them. But the names stuck anyway. When history remembers something important, it names it after the person people think of first. Tai-sung became the face of the technology. He traveled to 500 different worlds in the first year. He gave speeches and demonstrations. He sat with military leaders and government officials. Everywhere he went, he told the same story. He told them about Kyung-soo's wild equations and Haewon's impossible materials. He told them about the caves on Prometheus and the nights when they thought they would fail. He told them that humans had succeeded because they did not know it was supposed to be impossible. Young human pilots became famous across the galaxy. They started flying the newest, fastest ships. They explored regions of space that had never been visited before. They discovered new stars and new planets. They mapped the galaxy in ways that had taken other species thousands of years to accomplish. But the most important change was not about speed or exploration. It was about how species thought about problems. In the great universities of the Aurelian homeworld, the oldest scientists began to question their own certainty. If they had been wrong about faster-than-light travel, what else might they be wrong about? Young Aurelian researchers started to approach problems in new ways. They stopped always accepting the answer that came from their mathematics. They started asking what-if questions like humans did. The Vex-Thari, who had always followed strict safety protocols, began to understand that sometimes the biggest achievements required breaking the rules. They created new engineering schools where students were taught to think creatively, not just follow procedures. Some of their greatest inventions came from this new way of thinking. Even the smaller species, the ones who had always been in the shadow of the Aurelians and Vex-Thari, began to contribute their own ideas. The Kalori merchants created new trade routes. The Zixthali artists created new forms of expression inspired by humans' way of imagining impossible things. The coalition itself began to change from a system where older species dominated to a system where good ideas could come from anyone. Mi-jin became the director of research and development for the entire Galactic Coalition. She moved to the Coalition's main headquarters, a vast space station that orbited the Aurelian homeworld. She had teams of thousands of scientists from every species working on improvements to the drive. Her laboratory was the most advanced facility in the galaxy. But even with all her success, Mi-jin spent her evenings video calling Kyung-soo back on Kepler 442b. She would show him the new designs. She would discuss the challenges they were facing. And Kyung-soo, still working in his small laboratory, would suggest different ways to approach the problems. Many of his ideas still came from that same human instinct that had started everything, not accepting that something was impossible. HFY became famous for her work with exotic matter. She published papers that were studied in universities across the galaxy. Young scientists wanted to work with her. Governments wanted to hire her to create new materials. She built laboratories on 5 different planets and employed researchers from 20 different species. But HFY never forgot the caves on Prometheus. Sometimes when she was tired or frustrated with a difficult problem, she would go back to the moon. She would sit in the place where they had built the first engine, and she would remember what it felt like to create something that the entire galaxy had said was impossible. Tae-sung, the pilot, became even more famous than the others. He flew to the edge of known space. He tested new versions of the drive. He discovered 3 new star systems and 3 new habitable planets. He became a hero to humans everywhere, the symbol of human courage and capability. But the greatest gift that came from the Kyung-soo drive was not the technology itself. It was what the technology represented. It proved that the rules were not as permanent as everyone had thought. It proved that a new perspective could change everything. It proved that the younger species, the species that were still learning, could teach the oldest and wisest species something new. Universities began teaching what they called human problem solving. The course was based on Kyung-soo's method of questioning accepted answers. Students would take impossible problems and approach them from different angles. They would ask what-if questions. They would break rules and try things that the textbook said would not work. 15 years after Tae-sung flew the first drive, the Galactic Coalition reorganized itself. The old system, where Aurelians and Vexithari led and everyone else followed, was replaced with a system of equal partnership. Every species had a voice. Every species had representatives on every council, and humans, despite being the youngest species in the coalition, had as much power and respect as any other. The historians of the galaxy began to write about this moment as a great turning point, the moment when the impossible became real, the moment when the galaxy stopped accepting limitations and started asking what could be achieved instead. Some of the older scientists, including Dr. Vell, spent their last years training young researchers in this new way of thinking. Vell wrote a famous paper that said, "We taught the younger species to think like us. But they taught us something more important. They taught us to stop thinking like us. That was the greatest lesson of all." In his small laboratory on Kepler 442b, Kyung-soo Park was already moving on to the next impossible problem. Mi-jin had visited him last week and found him covered in equations again. His walls were covered with diagrams and calculations. His coffee cup sat empty on the floor. "What is it this time?" Mi-jin asked, smiling because she already knew what the answer would be. "Something even more impossible," Kyung-soo said, not looking up from his work. "The mathematics say you cannot transmit consciousness across space. You cannot send someone's mind to a different body or a different place. But what if we think about it differently? What if we do not send the consciousness? What if we create a copy of it somewhere else?" Mi-jin looked at the equations and felt that familiar feeling of wonder and excitement. Humans would never stop trying to do the impossible. That was their greatest strength. That was their gift to the galaxy. And the revolution was far from over.